Hello, everyone. I am delighted to have here today Lauri Love. Lauri Love was qualified by the US prosecution authorities as a British hacker, as a dangerous criminal, and he was charged by the US authorities for cyber terrorism. But he is also called a hero, a cyber activist, and a computer genius by many. Lauri was charged in 3 different US states in 2013 and 2014 for allegedly, along with a collective anonymous, break into computer networks of private companies and US government agencies, which includes the US Federal Reserve, the NASA, the US Army, US Department of Defense, Missile Defense Agency, Armed Corps of Engineers, and the list goes on. We'll be talking today with Lauri about cyber activism, hacking, the growing political prosecution of those revealing state crimes and abuse of power. We'll talk with Lauri about his views on Bolsonaro, the hacking operation called spoofing, and the revolving doors between public and private sector through which Judge Morrow and the prosecutors of the car wash operator are trying to squeeze themselves in. Lauri, welcome to the show. Thank you for talking to Diário do Centro do Mundo. I'm delighted to have you here.
Opa, tudo bem?
Excellent. How are you doing, Lauri?
I'm good. I'm okay. I'm very well. I'm very thankful and glad to be joining you. And hello to everybody in Brazil.
Lauri, can I have a look at what you're doing right now? It's a geometric figure.
It's a puzzle. It doesn't look good at the moment because I have to figure out how, it's five pyramids and they all have to go through one another to form a 12-sided shape, a dodecahedron. And so to do that, I have to sort of put this through one of the bits and figure out if I put it through the right things. And then, so it's a bit of a puzzle. And it usually takes a few goes to get it right. Eventually it looks quite nice. Maybe you'll see it by the time we finish.
I hope so. So Lauri, you faced years of criminal prosecution under the threat of being extradited to the US, where you could have served up to 99 years in prison in a US jail under what the UN call inhumane conditions, quite similar to the Julian Assange case. But the British court ruled that ruled in your favor and decided to bear this tradition on the same grounds that at the first instance Judge Vanessa Baraitser refused Julian Assange's tradition because that would be oppressive considering your mental state at the time and under condition of autism. We talk in Brazil about autism. We don't talk about Asperger because we think it's a Nazi doctor. I don't know how you prefer to be called.
I say it's the autistic spectrum condition. I don't even call it a disorder because I don't think it's a disorder. It's just another way to be human, and lots of different ways to be human. But so as you said, thankfully that I'm able to talk to you today because on appeal it was found that it would be unjust and oppressive to send someone such as myself with some mental health difficulties to be in the horrific conditions of the United States prison system, where I may have come to a sticky end, not a sticky. I might have died to be blunt, and a similar. Similar arguments have been made in Julian's case, and nothing has improved about the US prison system in the meantime, and they certainly want to put him in there for even longer than they wanted to put me in there. So we hope that the United States' appeal to try and overturn the verdict in Julian's case that he shouldn't be extradited will be unsuccessful, and he'll be able to be free and join his family.
So, Lauri, tell me about how you've been calling a computer genius for your incredible abilities to read computer language. How did your interest with computer, how did that start?
Started as a child, thanks to my dad, who was also a computer geek in an earlier generation, and he got me into it by buying a game system, a computer system for the home, old kind of computer called the MSX, that was popular in Eastern Europe. We also had some little handheld things called the Atari Lynx. I don't know if people remember
I had
Atari.
Atari too.
So Atari
My
Lynx, and
time.
that was super fun, and we could play all kinds of games on them. But yeah, after a while, it's great fun playing the games. Sometimes you have a game that's particularly annoying because you keep getting blown up, or you can't make it past this particular puzzle. And so I realized at some point that you can stop the game and look at how it works. In some cases, you can actually read the code for these games that were written in a programming language called BASIC, which was pretty user friendly for people. And so I got interested in changing the games and then writing my own programs, which was quite a lot of fun.
Lauri, you said, go ahead.
No, that's fine. No,
So,
I was pretty
Lauri,
much
you said that you have no problem in being called as a hacker, and there is nothing malicious about being a hacker. Can you explain to us what you meant by that?
Yeah, sure. So my definition of a hacker, and that's shared by many people in many different trades, not just necessarily related to computers, but often to do with computers, who call themselves hackers. And it's just someone who has an enthusiasm for technology that goes beyond just using it in a way that somebody else has imagined or designed, and would like to take it apart and understand how it works and put it back together in a new and interesting way to make it do something that it couldn't do before, and then to share the results of that with other people, so that other people can enjoy the endless possibilities that technology allows us to explore together. So a hacker is like a kind of engineer, like a kind of storyteller, like a kind of deep thinker, or someone who is willing to engage with a subject closely and learn the deeper mysteries of that subject, and then create things, or adapt things, or change things, and increasingly to share that with other people around the world. And so the very internet itself was put together by people who would call themselves hackers, who designed all of the protocols and all of the bits of software and the ways of putting the network together. So it's not necessarily a value laden thing. It's a neutral term. You can be a hacker and you can be doing something good. You can be a hacker and you can be doing something bad or malicious.
You can be a journalist and can be
yeah.
defamating people, or you can be a journalist and telling the truth. So it applies to all professions.
Exactly, yes.
So there is once you left the court, there is a striking image of you when a reporter asked you, and you said, I'm going to go quote unquote on that one. Nobody's in a position of power is able to absolve themselves of considering the human rights of other people whose fate they decide. And so we have a duty and obligation to continue fighting. Mm-hmm. So my question to you, when a hacking activity should be criminalized and when not, where do you think the legislator should be drawing a line?
Yeah, we have a concept in law, at least, well, yeah, I think in most legal systems, it has the Latin name, the mens rea, the kind of ill, of bad intent. And so in order for something to be considered a crime, there has to be a malicious intention for it. Some crimes are called have the exception for this, and they are called strict liability crimes, but those are rare exceptions. And so for most crime, it must be established that there was some intent to be malicious, and as opposed to, for instance, an act of activism, which might use means which could be criminalized. People make rules against, marching, and people make rules against having demonstrations and having strikes and organizing politically, but that doesn't make those activities wrong. It just means the people in power trying to stop people, like communities organizing together, or the labor movement agitating for better rights and conditions and pay and safety, etc. And so, yeah, for me, it's you could perhaps understand it as it says in the Bible, you shall know them by their fruits, which is to say the effect, there can be a good effect of something that was done that might have violated some line that's been drawn by society. But sometimes people have to come into your house to put out a fire, that you don't have time to invite them in because your house is burning down. And we call those people firefighters. We don't call them robbers, but they will take people out of the house, and they will take animals out of the house, and etc., etc. So we define it by the good or ill that it creates in society ultimately. And yeah, so
would public interest in the truth be one of those good intentions?
Absolutely. I'm not, and public interest is not in itself sufficient. The public can be interested all it wants, but it needs people that are willing to satisfy that curiosity to shine the light on some things where the light needs to be shone. And this is especially prominent in the case of Julian Assange, who's being criminalized and prosecuted for journalism, brave, courageous acts of journalism, exposing wrongdoing by the United States military-industrial complex, and many other things as well, many other revelations. But yeah, primarily with the through the bravery of Chelsea Manning and other anonymous sources, exposing some terrible things that were done in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the torture complex in occupied territory in Cuba, Guantanamo Bay, which should be closed and returned to the people of Cuba as soon as possible, of course. And so yes, when there is a bit of information that needs to come to public's light, and traditional means of journalism are not able to access that information, then it's just finding another way. We say the internet roots around any blocking, any attempt at censorship, it treats as damage, and it finds another way to connect those things. And so that's all that the combination of hacking and journalism is, in my opinion, is just journalism manifesting itself through technological means.
So we know you just mentioned Julian Assange, and Julian Assange pointed out that the distribution of information today is one of the main issues for freedom of speech nowadays. We have corporations determining what should be published or not, which have illegal interference in political process from corporations, dissemination of wrongful and malicious information, and selling users' information to intelligence agencies. We know that all well. So my question to you, where is hope for an effective democracy in the world that is determined by technology? How do you think the internet and social media should be regulated if supervised? And how should those who have the prerogative to classify documents be held into account, in your opinion?
Wow, that's complex question. let me have a think about it. I think we have to be constantly exploring new ways of coming to new arrangements. So I spoke at a conference virtually at a conference in Berlin yesterday, and about something I'd written in a book. It's called Whistleblowing for Change, published by the Disruption Lab in Berlin. It's free. You can find it online, and it's under the Creative Commons, so anyone can read it for free, or they can order the book. And I write about the possibility for there to be for the network itself to create protocols, again, like systems where truth-telling is built into the very network itself, so that if anybody is given a position of power, we do have to give power to individuals or to entities to get jobs done, to exercise offices of government. We have to give people privacy in their homes. We have to give businesses privacy to conduct their affairs and to be competitive. But we can make it the case through cryptography that the system encourages them to behave in a just way, to not abuse that power that they're entrusted with, because we can make it possible for any wrongdoing to be identified and to be proven in a way that minimizes the unnecessary information. So in this case, we could save people from having to take the courageous step. Although we applaud the courage of whistleblowers, it is very often the case that people who exercise that courage have serious repercussions and undergo a lot of trauma and difficulty because of their acts of courage, and the need that it's felt by the people in power to try and punish them and stop other people from acting similarly. And so I dream, and I talk about this a little in my chapter, talk about the technologies of cryptography that can enable this, the same cryptography that enables cryptocurrencies, allows us to build systems that minimize the requirements of trust. That's the basic principle of cryptography, is rather than having to trust people, you make a game whereby you don't need to trust. So a really good example is, imagine you have a bit of cake and you have two children, and you want them to divide the cake fairly between one another. You could just trust one of them to cut the cake and decide who gets which slice, but then they might want the big bit, and they might give the other child the smaller bit, or they
even pretend there was never a cake.
Or they pretend there was never a game, exactly. But you can play a game. You can come up with a very simple game, and it's very elegant. And what you say is, one of you cut the cake, and the other one pick which half they would like. And that encourages the person that's cutting to do it as fairly as possible, because they don't get to decide on the second bit. And so that very basic principle can be extended to the other example from my childhood. I grew up in a family with 3 brothers and a sister, so there were 5 of us, and sometimes someone would be naughty, and my dad would Scottish, and he was sometimes pretend to be a bit angry, and he'd line us all up and say, one of you own up, because I want to know who did it. And I remember thinking, it was often not me, sometimes it may have been me, but I remember thinking, well, I know that I didn't, and everyone else who doesn't knows that they didn't. So somehow, could we not together prove that we all didn't? And the only person who does not know that they didn't is the person who did. And at the time, I was a small child, and that seemed a sort of impossible thing. But it actually is possible. That it is possible to create a game where the only person who can prove something is true is someone that knows it is true, and the only person who cannot prove it, that cannot be refuted, that cannot be shown to be being dishonest, is the person who does not know it to be true, who doesn't have access to the information. So we could prove. Example I came up with is, if you are hiring people for your workplace, and we say as a society that you should be fair and not discriminate in hiring. So you should hire someone on the basis of their skills and not on the basis of their name or their religion, or their color of their skin, or where they come from, or whether they went to the school that you like, or rather than a school that you don't like. And what we could do is, when people are making those hiring decisions, they can commit to the information. They can almost like put the information, the resume, the CV, the application, into a box and seal it, and their decision of who to hire, they've also put into a box and seal it. And it needn't be known. It can be kept completely private to safeguard the privacy of both the company and the people applying for the job. But if there were to be a suspicion that they were being prejudiced and discriminating in who they were hiring, then the system itself could prove that yes, it was people that were from here that were getting the job and not people from there, and we say no, and these people would have to change it, or they would face some penalty for doing so. So I hope that answers your question in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Lauri, I'm now going to move from Berlin to Brazil. And you might have heard that in 2019, a Brazilian hacker, Delgatti, although his intentions are uncertain, there are some people who say he hacked information to make money on the stock exchange. This was one of the opinions of someone who accompanied the procedure in the Intercept. And some treat them as a hero, but that's not the point right now. We just want to say that this hacker, Delgatti, he leaked Telegram's chats and audios between the judge who incarcerated President Lula and the prosecution services. So these leaks show that the former District Judge Moro, who then became Bolsonaro Justice Minister, and now is running for Brazilian presidency in 2022, he was giving inside information, strategic advice. He was providing resources and directing a team of prosecutors to convict former Brazilian President Lula on corruption charges. What's more, those leaks also showed extra official and collusive collaboration of the Brazilian judge and prosecution team with the US Department of Justice, and to extort, to forge evidence, and to incarcerate a large number of what they perceived as commercial and political enemies. So it seems that Moro had a political agenda and a financial agenda, which matches pretty well with what Oliver Stone called the militarization of our economy, led by, we know, CIA and others. So these leaks were offered to the journalist Glenn Greenwald at The Intercept, the same who revealed the Snowden files. However, only a negligible part of this information was made public, just like, again, in the Snowden case. So considering what's happening to Assange now, and considering that the growing criminalization of journalists as hackers, do you think that journalists receiving large sets of government data that could shake a republic should be selectively leaked, as the Intercept generally do, at cost of the whole picture? Or should they all be published in the same fashion as WikiLeaks did, for the good of public interest and the right to know, considering the damage of being wrongly criminalized? What's your take on that?
It's a difficult question. I mean, first of all, there is an obligation, firstly, to authenticate, to ensure that these documents are authentic and that they haven't been edited or submitted by a source in any way that's misleading. And that can sometimes be the easiest job. The second job is to reduce harm, and so sometimes there could be names or information that does need to be redacted, simply because it would enable other people to take harmful actions, and so that is a necessary part of the job. And then the question goes, how far do you want to take this? Do you want to actually act as in an editorial capacity, which is to then selectively cut bits and decide what the story is? And sometimes that can be useful if with the Snowden archive, because there was so much material. If it had just been all made public, it would have been perhaps not reported on as well, because it takes some collaboration of journalists to really understand and put together things in a way. And we even with WikiLeaks, they did work together and will work together in the future with media organizations to do the job, which is to present the story. But that runs the risk then of deciding what the story is, or being selective and leaving things out. And we do worry in general about the important stories that get left on the cutting room floor, we say. I don't know if you have the same idea in Portugal, but when they used to cut bits of film or cut actual bits out of the paper, and you imagine them being left on the floor. Many important stories do end up left on the floor, and it means that we have to trust these intermediaries. So I would prefer in the general case, in the abstract, that eventually at least the public gets access to all the information, as long as steps are taken to minimize the harm that might do. But that's nothing wrong necessarily with media organizations working to tell the story in a series of episodes that facilitate the public to understand the importance of these stories. But we don't want to I say we, but people in the media should be careful about taking on too much of a we'd say like a paternalistic kind of like looking down as a father and saying this is what's good for you and this is what's not good for you to the public, because that can be a arrogant or a proud thing to do, and that can enable the state or capital or any of these other interests that are against transparency to put pressure on an organization. And the Guardian, after they worked on the Snowden releases, had an unpleasant visit from some people from our spy agency GCHQ, and they smashed the laptop that they've been given into smithereens, and it was a very big show of force. And Alan Rusbridger, the editor, left some time after the Snowden leaks, and since then that publication has become very reads to me sometimes like it might just be written by the spies themselves. And so there is this pushback against journalists, and the way journalists can preempt this so they do not have to fight that pressure is to not take on too much of a role of actually being the selectors of what the public should be able to see or not. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that answers. So there's a lot of conversation that it's not technically possible to get such a huge amount of terabytes whatsoever. But WikiLeaks proved them all wrong. The technical argument is not an argument, because WikiLeaks was a very small agency business, and they were able to publish truthful information that has never been questioned, the authenticity and information of public interest, all of them that could never be in question. So I think that this argument that's technically not possible, it's just
it's an excuse.
It's an excuse. We have seen the opposite happening. But I do understand that journalists could be afraid of being criminalized. But I also see a difference between a journalist who receives a story and need to check the sources from a journalist who receives huge amount of leakages and choose what is going to come out or not. Because this is in a way will favor some people of the public, as you say. Some businesses will be favored, and others might be the competition might be have a problem. I mean, selective leakage can be used as a weapon, as a commercial weapon, as a lawfare weapon, and it's, I don't know if you see this way, but I wish the spoofing operation was released in full, because we would have seen all the secrets of the Brazilian Republic, and many other people would have vindication. Many people who have been prosecuted under this fake operation probably will have vindication. Not a couple of them.
I mean, I have a lot of respect for Glenn Greenwald and
absolutely.
He looks after a lot of lovely dogs. But First Look Media that owns The Intercept, it is funded by a billionaire. It does have to operate in the United States, it does have to operate in Brazil, and therefore it can be subject to some pressure, or simply they may not have enough resources. And what WikiLeaks showed is that you don't have to rely on these limitations, that the internet itself has plenty of resources to host. You can just make these archives available, you create a search interface, and then you can say to the public, we will enable you to do the job of sifting through it and finding things. And so we create what's kind of the idea of a crowdsourced journalism, crowdsourced intelligence, the internet's intelligence agency, you know, the people's intelligence agency, and that I think will happen again in the future. That it takes some amount of bravery and some amount of organisation and technical sophistication to do that again. You know, you can still submit things to WikiLeaks, but there have been fewer releases because of, you know, all the energies that are having to be directed at fighting these legal cases and other things like that. So, you know, I would encourage more people to step up to the plate, and we could create a truly decentralized system of receiving information and doing this, checking that it's authentic, and doing the harm reduction, the harm mitigation, and then making it available, and asking one another in the spirit of mutual aid, in the spirit of democratic community organization to work together to look through it and to make as much available to the public. And we say that there is a long tail of the usefulness. So there might be a very, very useful thing at the very top, you know, at the top of the but there's this really long tail of useful things deep down that it might take a long time for someone to see, or it might become useful in ways that you could never possibly imagine. So I am very sad that there is there are Snowden archives that are yet to be released. I do think they're not just with they were with other consortiums of people, and that there is still a chance that they will continue to work on them and make them public. And the same, you know, in the case in your country with the spoofing archive, you might hope that if the Intercept doesn't feel that they can continue carrying the ball forwards with it, then they could pass it on to a international consortium, or maybe if not just a consortium of professional journalists, then to the public themselves through organisations such as WikiLeaks. Or
are you suggesting that journalists like Glenn Greenwald could have been under huge commercial pressure of the people financing their businesses not to publish certain documentation?
I mean, I can't say it in those terms because I don't know. All I know is the facts that speak for themselves, which is that not everything is released. That they have limited resources, and they feel a need to prioritize, and that just repeats the same things that we were talking about earlier. It just means that things get left out, and well, you say, you know, it's like you pass the salad bowl if you're eating together in a family meal or a big meal, and you take the salad that you need and you put it on your plate, but you let the bowl carry on and pass around to other people. You don't just, you know, leave it next to your plate and nobody else can use the salad. So it is to pass back, to give back at the end, when you say that I've done my bit, and no one can be asked to do everything. So, but don't interfere with other people from doing that same work.
Perfect. So I want to touch upon another thematic. In the US and in the UK, we are all familiar with the concept of revolving doors of jobs. You know, where government employees leave their government jobs and move into jobs into the private sector of the very same industry they used to regulate. So several of those prosecutors from the car wash operation are now leaving the public service and trying to squeeze themselves through the revolving doors after causing in Brazil an unprecedented destruction of the Brazilian construction and oil industry under the cloak of anti-corruption operation, which was named Car Wash. The former district judge Moro, who was then Bolsonaro's justice minister, and then now it's running for presidency, he went further from your everyday conventional revolving door. He closed a millionaire deal with Washington-based consultancy firm Alvarez and Marsal, and became in charge of the insolvency procedures of one of the very companies he helped to destroy, which is Odebrecht. We know in the UK by several examples that the revolving door, when it comes to high government officials, is just a ward mechanism for them because they have served private interests while they were in power and they hold privileged information. What can you tell us about more of the revolving door systems to the Brazilian audience?
Yes, I mean, we have this problem here in the UK, and I suppose anywhere where there is a kind of corruption, we'd call it nepotism, that is preferentially favouring people that are close to you, usually perhaps because you might have done bad things together, and they can hold that information against you, and therefore you're rewarded with more positions of privilege and authority to abuse, and it's very, very problematic. And the best way to fight that, I guess, is to have a robust democratic process where if it's identified and evidence can be produced that there is this revolving selection of people, not on their merits, not because they're good, but because of their connections and their we call it the old boys network in the UK, and that's like people who went to the same public school, expensive school where you have to pay, not the I don't know why we call them public schools, but private schools, and they wear the same tie, and he was a good old boy. I remember he was in there with me in Eton or something, one of our select schools where you find in our government are horrific, also slightly fascist, maybe a little bit less fascist than Bolsonaro government, but trying very hard. A lot of the people are from Cambridge and Oxford and Eton, and they're members of the same clubs, and they get pushed from one role to another. And yes, it's especially problematic when there is regulation of an industry and then people go to lobby for that industry, and because they have been working as regulators, they are able to be very effective advocates for those same companies to avoid the regulations and to skirt their obligations, and it's highly problematic. And so we should try and have a separation, really, of to some extent the political sphere from the regulatory oversight sphere, and that's another thing that we can do through technology to disinter.
How can you do that through technology?
Well, this is a bit more complicated, but like I was saying earlier, is that we can build. First of all, we can use technology to come to consensus on what our values are. So not necessarily just go with the ones that are already codified in law. A lot of them may be great and they can be accepted, but at least to review them and to have a process where an open process of participation where people can come to a consensus, something called process democracy, which is worth exploring. My friend Barrett Brown talks a little bit about it, but lots of other people too, and there's liquid democracy, which some of the pirate parties have experimented with, and the other things, and the technology of cryptocurrencies can help us to come to consensus, and that's shown that it's possible to have a consensus without an authority, without a trust. So where all the nodes are equally less likely to help build a consensus as another, just using statistics, and so once we've come to a consensus on these values, then we can weave them into the system itself, so that it becomes part of the free flow of that system, like the space between us, this air, this space that we can see through. Its very transparency is because it is accepting, it's bound together by the energy of loving kindness, and so the ability for us to see things over space is because there is this deep value that's sort of built into nature of the universe. And so through this transparency itself, we can allow the system to make it visible when these values are not being adhered to. So if a company is polluting, if a company is dumping toxic things into the oceans, if companies are logging or encouraging the logging of the rainforest, then that can be visible, and the system itself can come to a conclusion that these people should be then taken away from the positions of power that have allowed them to perpetrate this harm on the common good.
What is your take on cryptocurrencies?
I'm very interested in them. I haven't got around to owning much of cryptocurrency yet. One of the Bitcoin developers sent me some Satoshis, such as Satoshi is the smallest unit of Bitcoin. So I picked the number 31337, which is a silly number that hackers like, because it's how, if you were going to spell the word elite using numbers, then you might spell it 31337. It looks ELEET, but it's also a prime number, so that's worth about $20 of Bitcoin. But I've spent a lot of time reading about the technology, and I have some good friends. Mustafa Al-Bassam, one of the Lultech hackers, he did a PhD thesis on cryptocurrency technologies, and started a company that Facebook tried to acquire, to buy and to hire all of the people, and he was the only one who said, "Oh, I don't want to work for Mark Zuckerberg."
Are cryptocurrencies a threat to the financial system today, or do you think they can be co-opted by the financial system?
It's both. I mean, so Satoshi referenced in the first block of the Bitcoin blockchain the newspaper headlines after the great financial crash, the collapse of the bank, Merrill Lynch, and some other of the Lehman Brothers in the United States, and how that eventually caused this great economic crisis and hardship for so austerity, which we have in this country still, sadly. And I think you experienced austerity in Brazil as well as a consequence of this. And so so the idea was that perhaps we can't be trusting these financial institutions because they had been gambling effectively. There's always this temptation that we can take away the risk and we can make profit without taking on any risk, but the only thing you can really do is to redistribute the risk. And so they ended up all kind of colluding together to share the risk so equally that eventually the entire system itself was jeopardized and risked by their attempts to make money out of nothing. And so Bitcoin was a way of having an alternative, like a second foundation upon which to build a value system, a unit of money. And it can also be seen as a way of correcting what happened in 1979, which was to continue funding or paying for the debts of the war in Vietnam and other US military aggressions. They came off the gold standard. The money was no longer tied to a finite, scarce resource of gold. It became completely fiat. We say this is value because I say so. Latin, let it have value. Let it be worth $1. And so on our money it says, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £1 or £5, and that meant at some point you could go to the Bank of England and ask for the gold, and they would have to keep a certain amount of gold to make that possible. And this stops the inflation, which I guess you know of.
Very well.
You've had bad inflation. It's been a while in our country since we've had it. It's coming back now, but my parents told stories of how bad it was in the 70s here. And how inflation happens is people decide to just print more money because that's easier than collecting taxes from rich people that keep their money offshore. And so everyone's money gets worth less, and it takes away. And when that runs away, these scenes like in 1930s Germany, where people were heating their houses with stacks of bills. And I have 100 billion Zimbabwe dollars note, and it's, you know, not worth the paper it's printed on, and it's kind of funny, but it's not that funny if you're there. And you know, and I have friends in Argentina, and their inflation is horrendous as well. And so Bitcoin is designed to be the opposite. It's a deflationary currency. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoins ever made. It's the rate of their being produced halves periodically, and it's already halved several times now to maybe 4 or 5 times it is already halved. And every time that halving event happens, everyone who has Bitcoin kind of gets richer, because its value relative to the inflationary currencies, the fiat currencies such as the dollar, predominantly led by the dollar, because it's the main international reserve currency and vehicle currency, but same as the pound. Our government asked the Bank of England to magic up money, and that magicked up money gets put into the banks. The banks do this leveraging, where they only need to keep fractional reserve banking, it's called. They only need to keep a small proportion. It used to be that if people all came to the bank together and said, "Where's my money?" you know, they'd have to have it there and give it back. Now they sort of hope that people don't all come back and ask for their money at once, and that allows them to create 9 times, 10 times as much as has actually been put in. And it's great if you're in the bank and the people that the banks invest in. But and so yeah.
You've been called a cyber activist not by chance. You're not only considered a computer genius, but you have been politically active your whole life. You served in the Finnish army, and you became a conscientious objector. You're part of the 2011 Harrington House occupation, which was a student protest in Glasgow University.
The longest occupation in the UK history at a university. It took them months and months to get rid of us. Oh, about 7 months, and they tried to evict us violently at one point, and we held on. And they had to get hundreds of police in to help the security people evict us, and this upset everyone else at the university. And so when they finally dragged the last people out, lovely picture of me and a friend doing this. It was facing the police officers, fists in the air, and the police were very bored of being here, like not being welcome. So they all got marched off, and then we marched straight onto the much bigger building, the central Hogwarts-looking building that they used, the university used for private events like weddings, and it had the office of the principal and all of their dodgy accounts files, and so we went and occupied that instead.
But your career didn't stop there. I mean, you also were a very outspoken defender of Julian Assange, and so you have been always politically active. So, as a foreigner, do you think that the ultra-right tendencies in the world are gaining breadth and depth, or are they losing ground after Trump's defeat in the election?
I mean, things have turned back the other way. I think it's much better that Trump lost than had he won, but they very nearly tried to win anyway and have a attempted coup, if it wasn't so laughable. But on January the 6th, when people stormed the Congress to try and stop the count, it was part of an organized plan going up to the very top, involving Trump, and there's a process now of bringing light to that. But to have him voted president anyway, despite the will of the people. And you know, I hope in your country that the Bolsonaro regime will fall, and there will be restitution, whether it's under Lula or someone else. I don't know enough about.
What do you think of Bolsonaro? How do you perceive him, and how do you think the British people and media perceive Bolsonaro?
I don't know anyone that likes him, but maybe that's I don't have enough fascist friends. But no, I think he's terrible danger to the rainforest, to the people in your country to especially the indigenous, the First Nations people, and to the world, because we need to have cooperation on climate change. It's so important, and Bolsonaro is a climate change denier. He's a pandemic denier, and then that's led to many deaths that could have been avoided. The sooner he's gone, we don't have to speak his name again. I think the better it would be. But there will be others that will come, and Trump might try and run for election again, despite him losing the plot more and more frequently. And the next Trump, maybe not a clown, maybe a more charismatic, a more successful person who can mobilize. And we had the problem in the hacktivist community, or the trolling community that became an hacktivist community that was anonymous, where the state came after the people that were trying to do good, to have these values of justice and liberty, and because so many of them were put in prison, people sort of got a bit disillusioned and lost courage, and people were left without a kind of moral guidance, and a lot of them became the alt-right, the new young fascists, the new online fascists, and that is a direct consequence of the reaction against the more moral, values-led activism that happened under
What
Anonymous.
do you think would be the best way to tackle speech hate in the internet and those so-called digital fascism?
It's again not a very easy question. I used to be a free speech absolutist. When I was younger and more immature, I used to think that free speech should be absolute, because you like to think that you're past the point in the world where we actually where we've solved all these problems of discrimination, and you like to think that you live in a post-racist or a post-sexist world, and as you get older and more mature, you realize that's not the case, and therefore it does matter. But I do think that as far as possible, it should be a process that we help to guide people through to realize that their speech does matter, and how it's interpreted, how it's understood by someone can affect them. And we do, at heart, I think most people recognize that they like to be happy, and not to be sad, and not to be belittled, and not to be hurt by speech. And therefore, to the extent that they have empathy for others, then they can put themselves in another's position and not want them to be hurt by speech as well. And so I do believe in right speech. That's the one of the eight principles of Buddhism. To live a good life, you have to have various things right, and one of them is right speech, right concentration, right conduct, and so the harder question is the regulation, and the problem is with social media, it gets left to they don't have the resources. Facebook would like to have 1 billion users, but it doesn't want to pay for enough people to moderate 1 billion users, and Twitter again would like to have everyone be tweeting about everything, but it's not going to pay for a team to do meaningful moderation. So you get automated algorithmic moderation, and that is imperfect and can be gamed. And so I know a lot of people who are forced off of social media because they are maliciously reported by their political opponents. It's happened to me. I'm not in Twitter on my name, because I did used to get into a lot of fights with Nazis. And
the name so people can follow you.
I can't tell you that, or I'll get banned again. No, search for a mystery hacker on Twitter, but I don't really use it very much. But yes, you can be target, and for me that's not a problem. But people in marginalized communities, the LGBTQIA plus, etc., the queer community more generally, they can get pushed off. Palestinian activists can get pushed off of social media very easily and censored, and I wouldn't even wish it upon my enemies. we have this concept of no platform, which we like to use as anti-fascists only as a last resort. So we would not give a platform to a speaker who is directly going to incite violence. So we have the marches in Cable Street in London when the fascist movement, the British Union of Fascists, were trying to march through Jewish communities, and they got out and stopped them. And you know, I will join anti-fascist actions on the street, but I wouldn't then try and take away the platform for people on the right to be able to talk and have conversations, because I would like to have dialogue with them as well. And so. So it's difficult at the moment. Things are left in the hands of these unaccountable social media giants, and I think many of us in the hacker community are trying to move away and to build our own network. So we have this thing called the federated universe, the Fediverse, and these are software like Twitter. Mastodon is one example that use an open protocol, and so anyone can run their own instances, and so it's a smaller, more federated thing, and that's the same as I believe in that as a form of a political solution, which is, you know, anarcho-syndicalism.
Well, I
small
have to give you an example that happened in Diário do Centro do Mundo. We had a article on Assange. It had loads of readers. You can simultaneously look how many readers, and all of a sudden, from one second to the other, it went to zero. We have been also, as an independent media, we are constantly boycotted by the internet and even by this very platform that we are streaming from. Lauri, in a very emotional speech, you said that, I'll quote, "If Julian Assange is extradited to the US, none of us should be able to live our lives with ourselves, because we will have betrayed a human being of immense courage and principles, and we all would have betrayed journalism and the truth. And without these two things, we cannot have any time of hope or live in a free society." So my question to you is that Assange has not hacked any of the documents that serve as the basis of his indictment, but he has created an unprecedented tool to enable whistleblowers around the world to denounce crimes that state illegally try to hide under the cloak of confidentiality. Can you tell us, in your opinion, how whistleblowers are crucial in maintaining democracy in a technological era and in an era where information is inflated, concealed, and fragmented?
Sure. Well, you know, we have the saying, democracy dies behind closed doors. So the reason why we have increasingly made the places where power is exercised more and more public, more and more open, more and more transparent, is because then it takes away the ability for people to run the world in secret, and by using that secrecy to do things that they know that would not be viewed favorably by the public if they were seen. And so we don't used to be, perhaps to some extent still is the case, that all the important decisions are not made necessarily in Parliament, but are made in smoky private men's clubs with old wood oak paneling and green leather chairs, and you know, by the select few. And but we're trying to move away from that, and we're trying to increasingly use the power of transparency to put a stop to wrongdoing, to expose it, and to make it not worth people to get into power if they're going to try and abuse it. Because if they are to be seen, and that's why I talk in my book for the Whistleblowing for Change and anthology about making it possible that every part of the system can be acting as a whistleblower, to not have to force people to take a heroic decision, even though we commend them and we give them solidarity and respect, but it shouldn't be necessary for people to have their lives as disrupted as Chelsea Manning or Edward Snowden or any of these whistleblowers have had to pay pay for their heroism with a lot of difficulty, and if we can make the system so that the transparency is just there, without depending on individuals to take heroic acts of integrity at personal cost, then we can make everything, the very act of wrongdoing itself, blow its own whistle, and therefore the decision will then fall on the people that would abuse their power, if they know that the very act of their abusing power will make itself known, because everything that they say or do will one day be shouted from the rooftops, as it said famously in the Bible. Then they might just decide not to do these wrong things in the first place, and it's always better to stop something at the source rather than to treat the symptoms. But in the meantime, we have to fight for the people that have helped. So we have to keep fighting for WikiLeaks and for Julian Assange. And the reason I said that we shouldn't be able to live with ourselves if we allow him to be made an example of, to be sent to America, to the regime, the regime that committed war crimes that WikiLeaks revealed, to be rendered to that very same regime, to be punished by them, to stop other journalists from being so courageous, would be a great shame. And we shouldn't kid ourselves on. And I'm thankful that you set a great example with this, that we are powerless, because we do have power. We have power as people to speak out my words. No, I'm not in charge of anything. I was just outside the court and people asked me how I felt, and I said how I felt, and those words have inspired you in part to come and talk to me, and our conversation will now be seen by millions and millions of your wonderful viewers, I hope, or as many as care to watch it, and they might be inspired, and they might speak out as well.
There is something that you told me. We had a conversation after the Assange trial. We were sitting in a pub, and I asked you, you suffered immensely. Your family suffered immensely by this very vile and mean punishment, rather than a prosecution or persecution. And I recall asking you whether it's possible to heal, and whether you thought Assange, if he's free, which he will be at one point, would be able to heal. And you told me something quite that I vividly remember. You told me that you used very powerful words, that if there is life beyond time, I like the word you chose, that you believe we are just a small bit in something very big, and that your idealism is what kept you and gave you assurance that you're doing the right thing. So my question to you, would you do the same things that you've done before? Would you do it again?
Might do them a bit differently, because if you don't learn anything from your ordeals, then what's the point? But I don't look back on the me as I was at that younger time and think you weren't trying to do something good for the world, and I don't see the consequences of it, even though there has been great hardship. As you said, it exposed how bad the prison system is, and it makes it harder for other people to be extradited and to be subjected to that prison system. And I believe that ultimately prisons are something to be abolished. They are a testament to failure of society to deal with problems, and instead to treat people like animals, and that they're a continuation of slavery, especially in the United States. The very same places where these prisons are built used to be plantations in many cases, and they're still used as a workforce that is not paid very well and don't have great conditions, and so yes, there is a need for healing after trauma. That will always be the case, but we do heal, and scars fade, and eventually they just become cool story that you can tell, but it doesn't happen by itself. We have to care for people, and we have to. It's very important to have aftercare when people have been involved in high pressure, high stress situations, and so we must continue to express solidarity, and to through love. We can not me, but through the act of love and care, we can help heal one another, and by doing that for others, one day when we might need healing, we can expect the same back. So that's always good.
And I'll ask you for your final words to the Brazilian people and public that might be watching you right now. Did you finish your puzzle?
No, I'm a bit distracted. I will. You'll have to get me back when I finished it. I'll speak to you again, and I'll show you it. Then my final words. I wish I knew more. I wish I knew more of your language. Try and translate the phrase that I know from Spanish, which is that we say to one another
Did you say it in Spanish?
I'll say it in Spanish. La lucha continua, no se terminará fácilmente. The struggle continues. It will not end easily. Hasta la victoria siempre. Always until victory. And have courage, have faith, love one another, and organize. Don't panic. Organize. And good will overcome the darkness, as long as we believe and we keep fighting for it. So up the rebels, and I love you one and all.
Thank you so much, Lauri. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.